Hey, everybody, welcome to another AES edition of the Eventide Quarantide. This is a really exciting one, at least for me, and I don't even care if it's exciting for anyone else. This is all about me. Um, we often observe that we're lucky to be alive in audio today, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Having amazing signal processing tools like what Eventide makes for us is one of the reasons. Having amazing digital audio workstations that come free with our laptop or our phone is another reason. But another great reason to be alive in audio today is that we live at a time when our industry has reached an age where we need to start paying attention to preserving some of the most important recordings we have. And so we in our time have this responsibility, and we're meeting today with people who have the capability to help us preserve, I think, for eternity. I think that's the job statement. All the amazing recordings that have been made since the birth of sound recording at the end of the 19th century. So this audio restoration and preservation turns out to be a really active thread for the Audio Engineering Society. We have a technical committee that does it. We've run special tracks within our conventions on the topic where you attend papers and tutorials from folks like who we have here today. And we've also had topic-specific conferences dedicated to audio conservation. And so I'm hoping that we can all learn a little bit more about it and figure out how we can contribute to the effort. This might be a job description we might want to take on. And if not, it's certainly something we should support as others do it. John Krivit is with us. He was the chair of the first conference that the Audio Engineering Society did on this topic. John, I hope you could introduce the rest of this team.
Sure. Well, thank you, Alex. I had the good fortune of being asked to chair a conference on audio archiving, preservation, and restoration. And we did it at the Library of Congress's National Audiovisual Conservation Center, an amazing team of some of the best archivists and audio engineers in the world. They all come with amazing backgrounds, very diverse, and they do very important work. As you said, in 2018, June of 2018, we put together a conference. I don't know whether you can see this here. No, I guess you can't. But it is a conference on audio archiving at the Library of Congress. We pushed forward the science and the practice. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. And there was so much there were so many interesting facets to it. Everything from material science to metadata to optical imaging, playing back something without putting a stylus on a disc. There are so many different things that we can do. And so I wanted to, one of the big highlights of the conference was the fact that all the attendees got to go to Culpeper, Virginia, and see the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Brad McCoy. Brad McCoy is the longest tenured audio engineer there at the Library of Congress. And Brad was my cohort working very hard on this conference, and an amazing link and an amazing engineer and an amazing guy. And Brad, tell us a little bit about the background, or about the mission of the Library of Congress and the mission of the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. Maybe a little history of that too.
Sure. Thank you, John, for the kind words. And I absolutely need to spread the wealth. That conference, which went very well, really required a whole village. Not just the people you see on the screen right now, who all worked really hard, but also many other people at our building who coordinated moving people to hotels and providing food and all the good things that make a successful conference. So, and that started with the management, from Greg Luco, our chief, on down to my boss, right, Rob Friedrich. So I'm not joking in saying really it was really a great opportunity. Sure. The audio archiving field is an amazing part of AES in my mind, because it's certainly not the main focus for a lot of people, but it's a really interesting part. And it's an interesting part because it pulls together a lot of different pieces, only some of which are really hardcore, what many people think of as audio engineering, of things like setting up microphones and doing records and mixes. archiving involves engineering, but it also involves curiosity about history. It involves a desire to share and to preserve history. And that's all kinds of history. That's old formats, that's radio, that's technical things, that's metadata, which is really a key way of knowing what that is. And most of that, at least currently, is done in the building that's right behind John, the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. And that was opened in 2007. Some of us moved down from Capitol Hill, where the library had been recording and preserving for many years. And it's just an amazing facility that was provided by funding from David Woodley Packard, the son of the founder of Hewlett Packard, who gave $155 million. And the library supported the development of that building. The facility is nothing like what we had on the Hill, and that it has amazing audio rooms. And you can see behind my colleagues, Melissa Widzinski is in one of the A1 rooms, Rob Friedrich, and Kabir, are you in? I'm not sure if Kabir's in one or not. Yeah. But the rooms are isolated, they're tuned, they have state-of-the-art equipment, and it allows us as engineers to get the best transfer off of analog media and digital media, and to make files that go into our archive. It's really a blessing for us to be able to have a facility like that, as well as to store the analog originals in temperature and humidity controlled vaults.
Wow.
So Brad, what is the mission then of the Library of Congress, or specifically related to audiovisual? What's the mission?
The mission of the whole library, or the mission of the National Audiovisual Conservation
Well,
Center?
really the National Audiovisual. Who cares about books? Book schmucks. Let's talk audio.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you would say, I know you're saying that in jest, but one of the things that happened with the National Audiovisual Conservation Center is that it raised the profile of non-print media at the Library of Congress. You know, obviously the library has been a book-oriented place for many years, but now we've been able to get the attention of people like some scientists in the Preservation Directorate who can look at chemistry of why lacquer discs have exudation or why tapes have sticky shed. We have become a bigger visibility, and that's a really cool thing. Obviously, the main goal of the national, I mean, I don't have our mission statement here in front of us, but the goal is to preserve, collect, preserve, make available as it can be with copyright and other issues, audio, video, and film. And it's the largest collection in the world in that building right behind John.
So Rob Friedrich is the chief audio engineer, the supervisor of all the audio engineers there. Rob, how many audio items do you have at the NAVCC?
Last count was 3.8 million. So there's quite a few. Also, before I get started, I just want to thank both you and Alex for putting this on and giving us the opportunity to share what we do here in the Audio Lab. And we have an enormous amount of formats. And, you know, we're coming at this from audio enthusiasts, not necessarily to deliver any mission statements from the library, but, you know, we're here just as really passionate people to conserve the collection. The collection is the number one thing that we work with, and the number one thing that we steward, and the number one thing that we want to last forever. And we want to capture it at the highest possible quality using the best practices. And we have, I think, the greatest team in the world doing this. And I'm really, really proud to have this team. And we're doing a lot of great things.
Well, Rob, some of your engineers, we didn't have the Zoom squares for everybody. Who are some of the other ones who aren't here today, and what are some of their specialties?
Yeah, so we have four other engineers, four other great engineers. I would like to shout out to them a little bit. Patrick Smetanik, who is a classically trained horn player, has great ears. He's also has this talent to really attack complex problems with computer systems and that type of stuff. And also Rob Cristorella, who worked at the Museum of Television and Radio, which is now the Paley Center for Media. He came to the library. He works with the American Folklife Center a lot, preserving that collection, has incredible knowledge of multiple formats. Bob Norton, he actually was the head of quality assurance at the National Library Service, NLS, otherwise known as. So his details and the quality that he brings, you know, just the quality assurance and quality control that he brings to the team is remarkable. And also we have Ryan Croninger, another audio engineer who specializes in multi-stream capturing of audio. And it's a different type of workflow. It's quite complex. And he also fulfills a lot of patron requests for listening requests, and very talented team, along with my other
so
colleagues.
let me just say, you're the supervisor of this. You're doing all kinds of work, and you've got to sort of figure, you were describing to me earlier that your role is really sort of ensuring that everyone's workflow is supported, that you have the right equipment for the right job. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So I work with the curatorial section, which is recorded sound. Catlin Hunter is the head of recorded sound, and I work with her, and as well as the curator. And we have a team assembled that actually I attend those meetings, and I have to prepare for future planning and making sure that we have the tools to preserve what's being what's going to be preserved.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the room behind me right now is a multi-track preservation room. This is a virtual room. I'm not there, but this room was built in 2018, finished built actually a day before the conference. And since then, we've actually preserved hundreds of analog multi-track tapes. And that was a really, really big time in the library, because it was the first time we've actually done large format multi-track preservation, and we're doing it at really high resolutions. We were actually captured at 192 kilohertz and DSD simultaneously. All I can say is really super well done. And Bryan Hoffa actually established that workflow, and all the engineers will participate in preserving that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You just scared Bryan away. There he is.
I know.
Sorry about that.
Bryan, like all of you, but Rob as well. Bryan has a background in recording and mixing. You were a studio rat, and now here you are working at the NAVCC. And I'm just wondering how that experience informs what you do today, because I think we have a lot of people viewing this live stream who are recording engineers who might be looking for adjacent career fields or following adjacent interests. So it's a good story. All of you can tell this story, but I'll just pick on Bryan.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I come from the non-academic route, and I got into, music as a musician and as a guitarist, and interested in home recording pretty early on. And then I kind of wanted to take it to the next level. So, just basically stepped up and wanted to be an intern at a great studio that was in my town that I was living at the time, in Richmond, Virginia, called Sound of Music. And I just kind of worked my way through the ranks there of intern, gopher boy, coffee maker, floor cleaner, whatever, to get little bits of knowledge sort of passed to me from the great in-house engineers, as well as visiting engineers. And John Moran was one of the owners and the chief engineer there. And I had a great relationship with him, and he really kind of mentored me and showed me the fundamentals of recording. And then this was in the mid-late 90s. So he was at that time making records, kind of the old school way. I mean, it was primarily an analog studio in a time when a lot of studios were ditching their tape machines and going to Pro Tools digital audio workstation kind of set up because they could, but Sound of Music was pretty hardcore analog. I mean, there was some digital equipment, and there was a transition that happened over the years. But I would say getting that initial,
that experience with tape
the analog, large format, multi-track, and stuff like that, and to see how records were made and how documentation was done. For as an assistant engineer, we used to spend a lot of time capturing, meticulous notes about the vocal chain that was used in case they needed to recall it later, and so you didn't want to be without that information.
So when you open a box that's hasn't been opened for 60 years and there are notes in there, you know what to look for.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but like problem solving is something that all engineers should be able to do. That's actually probably a better definition of the work, is a problem solver more than an audio engineer, because you're just constantly trying to figure out what's wrong, because there's always something that like it needs massaged or some kind of fire to put out. So and that's not unlike archiving, because it's just a different kind of troubleshooting, but you're constantly seeing how you can do something a little bit better and steer it in a certain way. Sure. Attention to detail is another one. Having just, as an audio engineer, super attention to detail, because those are the kind of things that are going to make your assets last longer. Taking good notes to good metadata, like the recall sheets that I used, and just kind of wanting to make sure it's not that different, the jump from audio engineer, production engineer to archival engineer, in that like when you're producing a record or engineering a record, it's not live sound. It's like you're making something that I think that you want to last. It's a piece of art that you want to last. And, as an archival engineer, you're just taking that the next step further, and you're doing all the things, and you're following the best practices and standards to ensure that it does last.
Yeah. So Kabir Hermon, you're relatively new at the NAVCC,
Sure.
but you bring a wealth of experience from Magic Shop Studio in New York City, where you worked with people like, want to do some name dropping?
If I have to, yeah.
We're gonna make
like David Bowie, Foo Fighters, Nora Jones, Blondie, Blonde Redhead. I mixed some Elvis Presley records, Woody Guthrie records, Natalie Merchant.
And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to observe. So you were at the Magic Shop. You're part of the team that's recording and mixing these amazing records around the clock. And then not just you, but the Magic Shop itself becomes a facility that used to record music around the clock, and now it starts doing its own archiving and preservation. And so as I understand it, your job morphed even before you came to the Library of Congress. Your job morphed from mixing at 4 a.m. to doing transfers, maybe not at 4 a.m.
Absolutely.
Is that kind of your career path?
So the Magic Shop was a one-room studio, and we had a number of engineers. And so one of the second kind of career paths there was to do what we called the basement, was the archiving and restoration kind of work. And so when there was like a long session going on upstairs that I wasn't on, I would start working on the archiving stuff. And so initially it was just, 2-track stuff. And then I got put on a project that a company called Wolfgang's Vault hired us to do the Newport Jazz Archive. And so I got assigned to that as the multi-track engineer. There were 6 of us, and I was doing all the multi-tracks. And that's really where I cut my teeth on like DA88s and 2-inch multi-track and stuff like that.
And so a lot of people would know this. For example, me, the Newport Jazz has been tracked to multi for a long time. It's not just a festival. They've been documenting all that really important music, hopefully maybe even from the beginning.
Yeah, they had, I think the earliest tapes I was doing were 1/2-inch 3-tracks from the 50s. So they've been around, yeah. There was some holes in the archive. I think some people might have taken some gems out, but it was pretty complete.
Wow.
And then after that, yeah, I was just, between upstairs and downstairs. Just trying to learn everything I could. Same as Bryan, like I showed up at Magic Shop as an intern and just kept working till I got a job. And then Magic Shop unfortunately closed in 2016. Just couldn't make it work in Soho anymore. And but after that, I was just freelancing for about a year. And then I had an opportunity to come down to the Library of Congress as a contractor to work on a project. And I worked on that for some time, and then met all these amazing people, and they were all super helpful and learned a lot from them. And then the job came up, so I applied and got lucky.
So the story of Magic Shop is fascinating to me. Recorded some of the most iconic, amazing music in the world. I mean, to work on David Bowie records, I can't think of anything more incredible. And then, you know, as I'm told by Steve Rosenthal, who's a big friend of Eventide and the owner of
shout out to Steve. He's awesome.
Shout out to Steve, that September 11th happened and all the bands called up and said, sorry, we're canceling our session. We're not coming to New York to record. Steve gets into audio archiving and has won, as I understand it, 4 Grammy Awards for doing work for Woody Guthrie, Alan Lomax, Elvis Presley, Errol Garner. Just amazing collections. And
actually, Steve has a connection to the library. I mean, I met Matt Barton maybe in 2007, 2008, who's the curator of recorded sound at the library. Actually shared a credit with Brad and Matt way back when on the Haiti box set, which is an Alan Lomax thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Steve he did the Jelly Roll Morton stuff. And so he was really deep in the archival world. And yeah, it really taught me a lot about like the formats and the history. And
I think that's a lesson for, you know, for anyone who owns a recording studio or maybe a mastering engineer, that there's actually pretty good business in doing archiving and restoration. That
I mean, actually, the situation we're in now where people can't come into a studio, this is like a perfect opportunity. It's like, you know, correlated to like you were saying about 9/11.
Sure.
Sure.
Absolutely. And Melissa Widzinski, you're one of the newest engineers. You came from SUNY Fredonia, where you studied audio and music performance. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I studied at SUNY Fredonia and did a dual degree there in sound recording technology and saxophone performance. And
let's not talk about saxophones, please.
Oh, okay.
I think is really interesting because I'm always fascinated with education. There is not really a program in audio archiving. There's library science and there's audio engineering. You pretty much carved out your own interest in audio. Tell us how you did that as a student. It might be inspiring to some of the students out here.
Yeah, sure. I think I kind of had the perfect storm of a combination of interests and just the things that were available to me at SUNY Fredonia. I, you know, was doing those 2 degrees, but I also worked as a student worker in the archives at the library. And they just had happened to get in this large collection of a prominent classical saxophonist, which was obviously very interesting to me. In that collection, as I'm going through and processing it, I find all these old audio recordings, you know, open reel tapes, lacquer discs, cassettes, you know, a bunch of stuff that I was like, wow, this is great. These are unique recordings of concerts. You know, people haven't heard this stuff. And I really feel that, or I did at the time, that, you know, that stuff should be preserved and accessible. And so that kind of kick-started my interest in audio preservation. And I kind of put together for myself an independent study and used resources that were available to learn about audio preservation. And eventually, after I graduated, I made a proposal to the director of the library to actually do the preservation work, and that was accepted. And so I was actually able to make that happen, which was, it was a pretty satisfying achievement for me.
So then you made your way over to the University of Indiana, which is really well noted for amazing resources in audio archiving and collections. What did you do there?
Yeah, well, that wasn't a direct flight from Fredonia to Indiana. I actually, it can be difficult to find work in the field of audio preservation. That was definitely what interested me, but at that time, I just was not able to find something, and so I did work in Rochester, New York, for a few years doing live sound and working at the Eastman School of Music. But then this opportunity came up at Indiana University in preservation, and I jumped on it because that was a big interest to me, and yeah, that it was just a really cool experience. It was a great team working out there. My old boss there, Mike Casey. Here, go ahead.
So you are the go-to person at the library for dealing with wax cylinder transfers. I've been hugely interested in wax cylinders. What's involved? What do we need to know about if someone has a wax cylinder and they want to transfer it to digital format? What do we need to know?
Well, I guess you kind of need to know a bit. You have to have either the equipment available to you to be able to do a high quality transfer, or be able to know the people that have that equipment to be able to make the transfer for you. Mm-hmm. At Indiana, we had a large collection of over 7,000 field cylinder recordings. And so those were all made between the 1890s and the 1930s. And they're all very important from a cultural history point of view. There's things like completely dead languages that are recorded there. And so we were able to preserve all of those.
So ethnomusicology becomes an important part of what you do. You guys are preserving languages, you're preserving customs, there are tribal recordings. Yeah. Brad, your background is one more in literature and history and humanities, coming from Bowdoin College. What can you tell us about the preservation of those kinds of antiquities?
John, I always love chatting with you. Yes, I got a BA at a liberal arts school, and I kind of mentioned early on curiosity being a big part, and I think liberal arts really developed curiosity, whether it's in any part of the arts. And what we do really gives you a chance. Sometimes you're the only person to ever hear these recordings since they were made. Wow. I mean, you might be the only person to have heard a Roosevelt fireside chat since the 40s, and so if you're curious about what happened in World War II and in the 40s or the late 30s, you can really learn and have a lot of fun. Yeah. And I think having a liberal arts degree is not a direct path, although I've been interested in audio and sound all my life. I built amplifiers when I was in high school. But I didn't have technical training in audio. It was on the job for me. And that curiosity, though, really fed into making this a really worthwhile job that I still love going to every day.
That's awesome. So Alex, I don't know, is this a good time for a game?
This might be a really good time to play the Name Another Format Challenge. In which we'll go alphabetically. So we'll go, I've got to look at it here. We'll go Brad, Bryan, Kabir, Melissa, Rob, and then repeat. And let's just, to give people a flavor for how many different formats that you actually see, that you actually work with, let's just sort of have you sketch out another format. So are you ready to play the Name Another Format Challenge? Oh, sorry, John.
They're not doing a big description. They're just mentioning the name of the format, and we're trying to get as many of them in as possible. This actually comes from at our conference that we had in 2018. Our keynote speech was made by Bob Ludwig, the great mastering engineer, and the subject of his keynote speech was the many formats that he's encountered over his long career. So there you go. Thank you very much, Brad. And so we'd love for you guys to go around the circle and tell us formats as quickly as possible. So what's the
We'll
order?
start with Brad.
Analog cylinders.
Brian.
Wire recordings.
Kabir.
DATs.
Melissa.
Aluminum discs.
Aluminum discs, important. Rob.
Guys, gotta get better. L cassettes.
Ooh, I like it.
Let's get
Back to you,
some
Brad.
more ones going.
DA88.
Ouch. Brian.
Soundscriber.
Kabir.
Wait. What kind of sound scriber?
And no questions, no follow-up questions.
Let's see, micro cassettes.
Melissa.
Magnabelt.
Magnum belt, whatever that is. Rob.
I'm going to say Bell Tainter cylinder.
Ooh.
Melissa would appreciate that one.
Say that again. What kind of cylinder?
Bell Tainter cylinder.
So
was
it's a rule in this game. You can't make stuff up.
No, you can look it up. Bell Tainter.
All right, Brad.
PCM 1610 and maybe 1630 as well.
Brian.
DTRS.
Uh-oh, Kabir.
Edison disc.
Melissa.
Dictabelt.
Rob.
Tuffy phone.
What was it?
Did you say Tuffy? I had that one written.
Yeah, Tuffy phone. Too late.
Brad.
How about X86?
Brian.
Shellac 78.
Kabir.
Mini disc.
Melissa.
There's a good one.
Lacquer disc.
Rob.
Base.
Mary tape.
Brad.
I don't think anybody's mentioned plain old audio cassette.
Nope.
Well, yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
We had
1 and
micro
7/8 IPS. Yeah.
All right, Brian.
ADAT.
Kabir.
Dash, like 3348.
Melissa.
Cardboard disc.
That's not a thing.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Cardboard disc.
Cereal. I ate cereal to get one.
Right.
Many disc formats. Many.
Oh, so like the monkeys on the back of Captain Crunch cereal or something.
Yep.
Yes.
You've had to restore and preserve that?
Well, you didn't ask that. You asked what exists, right?
All right. Rob.
Studer Diaxis Magneto Optical.
Wow.
Right.
Brad.
If we're going to start talking base materials, I'm going to do glass-based discs.
Ooh.
World War II, they were rationing aluminum.
In fact, they were destroying aluminum discs for the war effort, right? We lost a lot. Brian.
Sad.
Edison talking doll wax cylinder.
Deep
Oh,
cut.
you know what? I'm sorry. I have to break in. Our judge, George Massenberg, has weighed in, and he says it's called an Eventide disc, not a cardboard disc.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. I'm sorry you know that. Where were we? Maybe that sketch is a good flavor for it. So some of these were absurd, but many of these you actually work with. Is that fair to say?
Almost all of them.
So I've got a question.
Collection.
What happens when you guys come across a broken record? What can we do with that? Bryan Hoffa, do you have the ability to digitize a broken record?
We do. We have a couple options. If it's not badly broken, if it's like a light crack or something like that, we might still be able to play it on a turntable by putting little shims underneath of the disc and you kind of manually lining it up using a microscope or a magnifying lens. But if it's too far gone, we have another technology that we can use. And it's something that the library supported, and it was developed in the early 2000s. It's called Irene. And it's of course an acronym, because we at the government, we love acronyms. So it stands for Image, Reconstruct, Erase, Noise, etc. And basically was developed by Carl Haber, who's a physicist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and Earl Cornell, who's a software engineer, and a couple others. But with library support, back then is sort of when it got off the ground. And basically, it's a non-contact optical imaging method for grooved media. So so it uses photography, actually microphotography, and the goal is to reconstruct, the audio from the groove of the disc or cylinder or whatever, basically almost any mechanically recorded item. So we have there's a 2D and a 3D model, and they work a little bit differently. We mostly have worked with the 2D, although we have a 3D system that is not yet installed. But I'll talk a little, just real high level, about how the 2D works. Basically, it's a like I said, non-contact. You use a really high resolution line scan camera and some optical glass, some optical tubing, and a very powerful light source to shine a spot down onto the disc. And the disc is rotating. There's several motor stages that turn the disc and everything. And you're basically capturing, these TIFF images that are basically aggregated from one revolution of the disc. So on a standard 12 or say 16-inch disc, there might be 40 revolutions. So each of those things exists after you're done scanning as an image file. And then the second part of it, so the first part's capture, but then the second part is running analysis tools. So it's custom software that was designed to basically essentially trace the groove with a virtual stylus. So it's run analysis tools. A lot of it's very serious mathematics. That's a bit over my head, but like there's great plugins and things that have been developed for it to be able to merge each revolution together to make one whole disk side, and to reject noise in certain areas and things like that. And so basically we use it at the NAVCC primarily on, as John mentioned, broken or damaged discs. I mean, you can do playable media on it as well, but it is more time consuming, and particularly with broken media, can be very time consuming.
And Bryan, I'm told that there are only 6 of these machines in the world. Is that correct?
That sounds about right. I mean, some places have a 2D and a 3D. So if you just count those as one installation, I would say probably 6 or less.
Interesting. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was just wondering, Bryan, is there an example of just to sketch how important it is, an example of an audio file that's been rescued through this process that may otherwise not have been playable?
Yeah, there are definitely examples. I mean, there have been some really high-profile projects that the library. I'm not the main Irene guy at the library. There's a gentleman by the name of Peter Allier who works in preservation reformatting, I think he is, or preservation research and testing, and he's involved in a lot of the development of it, the R&D, along with the guys out at Berkeley. And together, Carl and Peter and these guys have done some amazing work. The phonotogram. So that was the earliest recording. Actually, phonotogram is a format that should have come up in our format discussion there a minute ago. But
that was going to be my next answer.
All right, good. So phonotogram was a format that was basically 20 some years prior to Edison's tinfoil cylinder. So a lot of people think that Edison was the first person. Well, Scott was a Frenchman who basically captured sound with no intention of necessarily playing it back, but he just wanted to capture the waveform. So he set up an apparatus very similar to a phonograph, but it worked on paper with carbon, and so they were basically put away for many years. And a lot of people who study history know about Scott's phonograms, but the public doesn't know about them. But a number of years ago, several audio historians got together, and with the help of the IRENE technology, they were able to rescue audio from these phonograms that were recorded in 1850.
Now, so you guys have an amazing collection of all kinds of playback devices. There's one of the highlights for me at the NAVCC is this little museum area that has all of these great playback machines. Is Rob Friedrich, is there a phonogram there?
Is it in the library?
Do you have library... one of those in your little museum of audio playback devices?
If it's not there, we have it in another room, but yes, I'm sure we have that there.
And what are some of the other interesting playback devices that you've got in this interesting little museum that you've got at the NAVCC?
Oh, well, we have the gamut there. We have a EMT turntable. We have a Scully lathe. We have original Ampex recorders, like among the first series, 300 series as well. We have...
you have a magnetophone?
Yeah, we a magnaphone. Yes, we do.
Yeah, and I noticed that there are a lot of wire recorders and playback.
Wire recorders there, and we played that back. We played live wires in that room at the last AES conference.
Yeah, pretty.
But I'd like to just talk about some of the collections, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just talk about some of the formats in those collections. I mean, we have just an enormous collection, but there are some really great ones. Just to highlight some that we're working on now. For example, we're doing the Studs Terkel collection, which is interviews of sound recordings and WFMT radio programs. And that's actually, you're able to live stream that online. You can look that up. And it's really an amazing collection of over 40 years of interviews of entertainers, musicians, actors, politicians, business owners. It's truly a remarkable example. It's mostly open reel tape in that collection, but there are other formats there. We have the Gershwin collection, which has various formats. You have Dash with that. You have Prodigi formats on that collection. Another, that was a collection that I remember going into the vaults looking at, and a funny story is I actually saw my handwriting on some of the boxes from when I was at the recording studio.
Wow.
At the young assistant, or probably a runner then. But anyway.
Were your notes thorough and legible?
I did look at them. Everything was there.
Excellent. Anything that's a little bit hard to stomach? I assume that not everything is as exciting as Fidel Castro's speeches.
Oh yes, those are great ones to transfer. We're not there to cherry pick. We do what's the mission, or what the curatorial decides, and what the public demands too, because the public can come on to the Library of Congress and listen to just about a good portion of the collection, except for maybe some very few restricted items.
So how does someone, let's say I'm really interested in listening to some amazing, important historic recording, how would I know that the library has it, and how would I be able to access it? How does that process work? Quickly.
Yes, you could. You would have to contact the reference center, and they will research it for you. And if it is digitized, you can actually go to the reading room and listen to the material right in there. And if it is not, we will turn it around and 7 to 10 days,
Wow.
so that you can go there and listen to it. So it's really amazing how the collection is so accessible.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Alex.
I think I expressed myself poorly at the beginning when I was asking about what is your mission. It wasn't literally what's your mission statement, but I wanted to point out that not only are you trying to find and preserve, for eternity these assets, but you want to make them accessible to the extent that it's legal also. And I think that's a really noble part of this job, is to not just preserve them, but make it possible for John Krivit to find them and listen to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those people who can't make it to DC for a free listening appointment, we also have another option where a file can be delivered, or a CD, but mostly files these days, delivered to somebody to have for research purposes or for personal purposes, as long as they don't try to sell it or whatever. But in those instances, it's up to that patron or customer to clear the copyright permissions ahead of time, and then they just basically pay us studio rate to transfer the item or to transfer the files once they're already digitized.
So let me also ask, a big issue with archiving and preservation is metadata. And, it has a lot of functions, everything from how an artist gets paid to how an artist gets credited, where was the music recorded, who played bass on track 3. Brad, can you talk to us a little bit about, the 30,000 feet view of metadata?
Well, if you think about a physical item and you've got a tape box and you've got all that information written on it, obviously we all know in a digital file you don't have that. So it's important to get as much of that information taken down, sometimes put in the header of the file, embedded metadata, but also into a database. We use Pyramix at the Library of Congress as our DAW. So we have a way in Pyramix where we enter a lot of that information and then it's moved via XML to our database. But if you don't capture it, you don't know who played sax on that particular recording, or you don't know who mastered that recording, so they can't get paid. This is an important for the P&E wing, obviously, for the Grammy folks or NARIS, who are thinking about engineers and studios, for musicians, for money, but it's also, people's legacy. It's obvious, somebody like Al Schmidt, who's done so much great work, a lot of people are aware, but maybe a lesser known engineer, they might not know. And it's very important to grab it. Let me just say one thing about AES, John. AES pays a lot of attention to metadata. There are standards committees that do that. SCO 701 is a standards committee where they write particular standards that are really critical so that we all capture it and you can read it in places where you don't create it. It needs to be standardized. There's also a technical committee, ARDL, which is Archiving and Digital Libraries, which pays a bunch of attention to metadata. And we talked a lot about it at our conference back in 2018. So it's a very important piece of what we do as archivists, but it's also an important piece for recording and production.
So Brad, you've played a substantial role in really advancing the practice and the conventions of metadata. What's a specific thing, just for someone who this is very new to, what's a piece of metadata that you've agreed to? Like, what's one standard involved in metadata?
Well, I guess one of the things I would say is it's important to capture it immediately before you forget it, to note what's on track 16 versus what's on track 5. But it's also important to pay close attention when you're doing an archival transfer. You might not have a note that says this is Woodrow Wilson reading a speech, but you might, and you might not know where that was done, but you might have to use a little detective work. I heard that it was recorded at the White House, so it's in Washington, D.C., and it's maybe in the 20s. So you put all this together and, you kind of conform, and sometimes it's not until you do the next tape in the series or the last tape.
Yeah.
But that's part of the fun and the curiosity of this is to give the best picture you can for our catalogers to make a complete record, but ultimately for our patrons who come into that reading room that Rob was talking about, so they can find the wealth of our collection.
So, Brad, technical committees for the Audio Engineering Society and standards committees meet traditionally at the AES conventions, and they iron out all of these details. Let's say I'm a mastering engineer. I'm really interested in this. I've done some archiving work, and I'd like to add my expertise to the conventional wisdom. How would someone get involved in that technical committee? Do you have to be invited? Should you reach out to someone? What would someone do to become involved in an AES technical committee?
No, those meetings are absolutely open. And the standards committee meetings are a little more, getting into schema, and those are the kind of folks that might really get off on XML. And yeah, that's a whole different gig. The technical committee, ARDL, which was led by Nadia Velaskovitz, by the way, our past president, a wonderful, very knowledgeable woman from Austria, from Vienna. Nadia makes sure that the metadata comes up in our technical committee meetings, and anybody's welcome to come to those. I actually led one a couple years ago, and we had 20 people come to an ARDL meeting, which is pretty cool.
So where would someone go to find out information about the technical
AES website?
AES.org. That's great.
Yeah.
And so other resources that are available for learning. Melissa, you mentioned the ARSC manual. That ARSC stands for
Association for Recorded Sound Collections.
Recorded Sound Collections, of which I am also a member besides AES. And they put together a guide that Brad was just holding up, which is really terrific. I think you can even get it online.
That's available as a PDF for free.
Clear.org, CLIR.org.
CLIR stands for
Council on Library and Information Resources.
Okay, great. And what about also our friends at the NARIS P&E wing, the producers and engineers wing, put together a wonderful document for standards for high-res audio and preservation. That's something that informs the work that you do as well?
Yes. So, the P&E wing is very active in high-res audio, and they have a lot of great documentation there to help guide people to using best practices and capturing stuff in high-res.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a difference.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of information is available for that.
So for learning more about this, there's a question from YouTube. Is there going to be another audio preservation conference at the Audio Engineering Society? Is there anything we can pre-announce, even though in-person meetings are a little bit in question?
We are planning something, yes.
Yeah. I was just going to say, we had planned to do it in 2021, but because of all the problems, another conference got moved back to our date. So we're going to do it it looks like, hopefully, if everything goes well, 2022. The one that we did in 2018 was sold out. It was wonderful. I think people filled out a survey, and I think 85% of the people who went said that they would definitely come back to the next one. I think it was a really fun time. We did everything from material science up through preserving multi-track masters to distribution. There are so many more topics that we can talk about. If you're not that interested in the chemistry of magnetic recording tape, you can walk into a room and listen to an old recording from NBC or an old Rolling Stones thing that's been preserved, or all kinds of really amazing things. So it looks like it's going to be wonderful. We've got some wonderful people working on it. We just have to figure out when the date is. So until then, there's always a wonderful track on audio archiving and restoration and preservation at the AES convention. So my assumption is that you will find great content, if this is of interest to you, at the next AES convention that happens in October. So you can find information about that on aes.org, or Alex, maybe there might be a Facebook group where you could find it. I don't necessarily want to say, but
no, well, people can find it. I should just also, I wanted to add on to it that AES has an archive of videos of live events that have happened called AES Live. And I've been working this week on uploading new assets. So it's not there yet, but look, in about 2 to 4 weeks, there'll be a large number of new videos in the AES Live library. And I happen to know a number of them are from the audio archiving and restoration track at the last convention that was in New York last year in 2019. Yeah. And they're awesome videos.
So I think, it's interesting in this day and age, AES is moving to a lot of online content, which means, if you live in India or you live in Cincinnati, you might be able to still participate. And, we had people from, I think, 23 different countries.
59. Sorry, John. 59 different countries.
59 for what? In AES or?
For the AES convention that just happened, we called it Virtual Vienna. We had planned a convention in Vienna and had to go virtual. 59 countries were represented. It was amazing.
I was talking about the AES conference that we had at the Library of Congress.
I see. Well, I prefer you talk about what I'm thinking about, not what you're talking about.
Oh, and speaking of that, our another amazing resident expert, Richard Hess, wrote in that a little clarification of our rules. Cardboard and Evatone are 2 different disk types.
Oh, good for Melissa. Yeah.
If you want to see great minds of audio archiving, knockheads, we're going to have some wrestling at our next
Format wrestling.
So while we're here, what the heck is a Magna belt?
It's a belt that has a magnetic signal on it. If you're familiar with a dicta belt, which has a groove in
that was my next question. Yeah. What's a dicta belt?
It's they're kind of like a floppy plastic disc, or not a disc, rather, like a belt that can be fit onto a mandrel and played using a stylus. So it's kind of similar to a cylinder. It was used a little bit later after the period of time that cylinders were used, mostly for things like office dictation. And then in the Magna belt is kind of similar to that in the form factor, but it has a magnetic signal rather than a groove.
Yeah, we had done a Magna belt transfer some years ago in the hopes, and this goes along with metadata. It was written on it that it was one thing, but it turned out to be another. The hope was that it was what was written, but we actually had to rig up the machine with a DC voltage regulator to control the speed of it. And our resident genius, Bill Haley, who's maintains all, he's our electronics specialist, managed to rig up this system that really worked really well. Very cool.
Brilliant minds. I'm just curious, the building that's behind me was originally used for what purpose? Brad, you might.
You want me to jump in? So the building that's behind you is actually built just for us. That portion of it. There's a portion next to it that was for the Federal Reserve Bank, and it was underground. And it was totally renovated before we moved into it, but it's where we store our materials. And it was originally designed for the Federal Reserve Bank to keep money supply to restock the economy, to restart the economy in case of nuclear holocaust disaster. And as you can imagine, it didn't really have a whole lot of signs out front, but most of the people in Culpeper knew what it was. And then it was purchased, and the library and Mr. Packard, as I mentioned earlier, refashioned it. And the building behind you is all brand new. That's where most of us work.
It's a beautiful building, and one of the highlights of our conference in 2018 was the tour. Everybody wanted to see every square inch of this amazing place. It literally is the hall of audio archiving superheroes. And I'm enormously grateful. As an American citizen, I'm enormously grateful that our tax dollars go to such fabulous work done by such an incredible team of dedicated engineers. I think, from the leadership of the NAVCC to, the entire staff is really unbelievably professional. And you guys really are a beacon of work in this audio field. So I'm grateful, very grateful.
Thanks, John.
Are you?
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thanks
I
for
will
your support.
say that the NAVCC is about the people. Their commitment to the collection and to the quality of work is just, I arrived in 2011 and I was always impressed, coming from the private industry and entertainment industry. And I was always blown away by the knowledge base and the commitment.
Yeah.
And you can actually see that library wide.
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier that that the big overall quality is curiosity. And I think, I speak to a lot of students, and I think most students think that it's all about information. It's about, like, I need to have this information. Audio is that our technology is a moving target. And I think what you never want to give up, what you never want to lose, is curiosity. You're always going to want to learn how to do something new. And I'm enormously grateful for the amazing work that you guys do. And if somebody has questions for the engineers at the library, Rob, should they email you?
Sure.
You don't want to get hundreds of emails.
I already do. I get hundreds every day right now. How about they email you, John, and then you forward them to
All
me?
right, that sounds good. Email me. You can find me if you're on Facebook. You can find me on the Hey Audio Student Facebook group, or the Audio Educators Facebook group, and it's such a fascinating part of audio technology. And Alex, what do you think?
I think we should wrap here. Thanks very much for your time, for sharing your expertise, and also inspiring us with further curiosity.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
You guys
Thank
are
you.
great. Thank you.